Rome kept meticulous records of its legions, where they camped, who commanded them when they died, which is why one entry is so disturbing. The 9th Legion, 5,000 of the best soldiers on Earth, simply stops existing. No battle is recorded. No grave have been found. No Roman historian even admits anything happened. An entire legion walked off the edge of history, and Rome never said a word. Legio IX Hispana was not some green garrison unit. It had earned its name, the Spanish, in the brutal wars of Augustus, and its eagle standard had crossed Europe with Julius Caesar. In the year 43, it splashed ashore in the Roman invasion of Britain, one of 4 legions sent to conquer the island at the end of the world. For the next 60 years, Britain would be the 9th story, and very nearly its grave twice. The first near-death came in the year 60, when Queen Boudica rose in revolt and burned 3 Roman cities to ash. The 9th marched to stop her straight into an ambush. Its infantry was annihilated. The commander escaped with only his cavalry. Rome rebuilt the legion with fresh recruits because that is what Rome did. The 9th had died once already and come back. The second time would be different. By the year 71, the rebuilt 9th was spearheading the push north, and it built the great fortress of Eboracum, the city we now call York. We can still touch its presence. Thousands of roof tiles stamped Leg IXHISB, the legion signing its own work. For decades, it was the northernmost legion of the entire empire, holding the wild frontier where Roman roads faded into moor and mist. Then Rome pushed into Caledonia, modern Scotland, and the land pushed back. During Agricola's campaigns, the Caledonians chose one target for their great night attack, the camp of the 9th. They stormed the sleeping legion in the dark, and it was saved only when Agricola's cavalry arrived at dawn. The pattern was set. Whenever the north exploded, somehow, it was always the 9th standing in the worst of it. And then silence. The last certain trace of the 9th Legion in Britain is a single stone inscription from York, recording the legion rebuilding a gateway. It is dated to the year 108. After that, the record simply ends. No transfer order, no triumphal monument, no war memorial. Around the year 120, a different legion, the 6th, arrives to take over York, moving into a fortress that apparently no longer had an owner. The traditional story wrote itself. The 9th marched north to punish the tribes, vanished in the highland mists, and was slaughtered to the last man, a disaster so complete, so humiliating that Rome erased it. Some even link it to the Emperor Hadrian's decision in 122 to seal the frontier with his Great Wall. A corroded bronze eagle dug up at Silchester became the seed of a beloved novel, The Lost Eagle of the Lost Legion, waiting somewhere beyond the wall. But the evidence has a twist. Tile stamps of the 9th have turned up at Nijmegen, in the Netherlands, possibly dating after the York inscription. And several of the Legion's senior officers went on to have thriving careers into the 120s, which is hard to square with a Legion massacred years earlier. So a rival theory emerged. The 9th left Britain alive and died somewhere else, in the ferocious Jewish revolt of Bar Kokhba, perhaps, or on the Parthian frontier in Armenia. What we know for certain is this. When Rome carved its official list of all serving legions onto stone columns around the year 165, the 9th Hispana was not on it. Somewhere in that half-century gap, 5,000 men, their eagle, and their entire history ceased to exist, and no surviving Roman source spares them a single sentence. For an empire that celebrated every victory in marble, the silence itself is the loudest evidence. Whatever happened, Rome did not want it remembered. So the 9th Legion now marches only through the question mark, cut down in the Scottish mists, or bled out in a desert revolt 3,000 miles away. Somewhere, under a Yorkshire field, a Dutch riverbank, or a Judean hillside, an eagle of imperial gold may still be lying in the dark. Rome lost many battles and admitted them. This is the one loss it refused to write down. Subscribe, the vault keeps the stories history tried to delete. In 1590, a ship dropped anchor off the coast of what is now North Carolina, carrying supplies for England's first American colony. But the colony was gone. 115 men, women, and children had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no grave, no sign of battle. The only clue was a single word, carved into a wooden post, CROATON. The story begins with ambition. Sir Walter Raleigh, favourite of Queen Elizabeth, held a royal charter to plant England's flag in the New World. Spain was hauling silver out of the Americas by the shipload, and England wanted in. Roanoke Island, hidden behind the treacherous sandbars of the Outer Banks, would be England's secret foothold. In 1587, 115 colonists arrived under Governor John White, an artist whose watercolors of the New World are still treasured today. Weeks later, his daughter gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in America. 9 days after that christening, White sailed back to England for desperately needed supplies, leaving his family behind. He expected to return within months. Instead, history slammed the door. The Spanish Armada attacked England, and every seaworthy ship was seized for the war. For 3 agonizing years, John White begged, borrowed, and schemed his way across the Atlantic, while his colony, his daughter, and his granddaughter waited on the far side of an ocean. When he finally landed in 1590, on his granddaughter's 3rd birthday, he found silence. The houses had been carefully taken down, not burned. There was no distress cross, the agreed emergency signal, just that word on a post, CROATOAN, and the letters CRO carved into a tree. The colonists hadn't fled. They had moved deliberately and told him where. Croatoan was the nearby island, today's Hatteras, home of the tribe whose leader Manteo had befriended the English. White prepared to sail there the next morning. Then a hurricane struck, snapped the anchor cables, and drove his battered ships out to sea. The captains refused to turn back. John White never set foot in America again and died never knowing what became of his family. England forgot Roanoke for 17 years. When the Jamestown colonists arrived in 1607, they heard tantalizing stories, reports of people dressed like Englishmen inland, of a chief who claimed to have slaughtered refugees living among friendly tribes, of gray-eyed natives who remembered white ancestors. Every trail was followed. Every trail went cold. Modern archaeology has picked up the scent. On Hatteras Island, digs have turned up Elizabethan artifacts in native settlements, part of a rapier, a writing slate, fragments of English pottery. 50 miles inland, at a spot called Site X, more 16th century English ceramics surfaced, exactly where a hidden symbol on John White's own map suggests a refuge was planned. The mystery has also bred a century of frauds. The infamous Dare stones, dozens of rocks inscribed with messages supposedly from Virginia Dare's mother, electrified America in the 1930s until most were exposed as a stonecutter's hoax. Fake maps, fake genealogies, fake grave. Roanoke became a mirror for whatever people wanted to find. Strip away the legends, and the likeliest answer is quietly human. The colonists did exactly what the carving said. They went to live with the Croatoan, married in, raised children, and simply stopped being English. No massacre, no mystery, just assimilation, history's least dramatic ending, and its most common one. Unless, of course, the next dig proves otherwise. Subscribe for more vanished history and tell me, what do you think happened to Virginia Dare? In May 1845, the 2 most advanced exploration ships on Earth left England to conquer the last blank space on the map. They carried 129 hand-picked men, 3 years of food, and the confidence of an empire. 2 months later, whalers saw them moored to an iceberg in Baffin Bay, waiting for the ice to open. Then the Franklin expedition sailed west, and every single man vanished. The prize was the Northwest Passage, a sea route over the top of America that Europe had hunted for 3 centuries. Sir John Franklin, a 59-year-old veteran of 3 Arctic expeditions, was given HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, bomb ships with reinforced oak hulls, iron-plated bows, and something no polar expedition had ever carried: steam engines and retractable propellers to force a way through the ice. Below decks they stowed a marvel of the industrial age, 8,000 tins of preserved meat, soup, and vegetables, enough for 3 years. The contract had gone to the lowest bidder, a supplier named Stephen Goldner, who soldered his tins hastily with lead. Some historians believe that decision mattered enormously. Others point out the Arctic hardly needed help killing men. Both, it turns out, were right. The expedition's first winter camp was found years later on tiny beachy island, along with 3 grav, 3 young sailors, dead in the very first months, buried in permafrost so cold their bodies survived intact. When scientists exhumed them in the 1980s, the frozen faces stared back as if asleep, and their bones carried elevated lead. The expedition had left its first warning behind and sailed on. In September 1846, off King William Island, the ice closed around Erebus and Terror and never let go. 2 summers came and went without a thaw. Scurvy crept through the crews as the canned food ran short or turned bad. And on the 11th of June, 1847, in the middle of the frozen wasteland he had come to conquer, Sir John Franklin died. Even his grave has never been found. We know any of this because of a single sheet of paper hidden in a stone cairn. The Victory Point note was written twice. In May 1847, an officer recorded, almost cheerfully, "All well." 11 months later, a second, shakier hand crowded the margins. "Ships abandoned, 24 men dead. The survivors, 105 of them, setting out on foot for the Canadian mainland, 600 miles away." No one made it. Inuit hunters later described what they had seen: ghost-thin white men hauling a boat on a sledge, falling as they walked. Search parties found the trail, skeletons in scraps of uniform, a lifeboat pointed backwards toward the ships, loaded absurdly with silverware and soap. And on some of the bones, cut marks that told the darkest chapter: the last survivors had eaten their dead. What followed was the greatest rescue mission of the 19th century. Lady Jane Franklin refused to accept her husband's death and shamed the world into searching. More than 30 expeditions over 2 decades. They failed to save a single man, but in failing, they mapped the entire Arctic archipelago. The passage Franklin died for was finally charted by the men sent to find him. Then, after 169 years, the sea gave the ships back. In 2014, Canadian searchers found HMS Erebus resting almost intact in shallow water, precisely where Inuit oral tradition had always said a great ship sank. 2 years later, Terror was found too, eerily preserved, plates still on shelves, in a bay that had carried its name for a century. The best sonar of the modern age confirmed what Inuit testimony had recorded all along. Divers are inside the wrecks now, working room by room toward the captain's cabins, where logbooks sealed in Arctic mud may yet survive. If they do, the dead of the Franklin expedition may finally tell their own story. What happened in those 3 frozen years? 129 men sailed into the blank space on the map. The map is finished. Their story isn't. Subscribe, the vault isn't done giving up its dead. On the 4th of December 1872, a ship was spotted sailing erratically in the middle of the Atlantic. Her sails were oddly set, her wheel unmanned. When boarders climbed onto her deck, they found cargo worth a fortune, food and water for 6 months, the crew's belongings untouched, and not one living soul. The Mary Celeste became the most famous ghost ship in history. What happened aboard her has never been solved. She was found by the Day Gracia, a British brigantine whose captain knew the missing man personally. Both ships had loaded in New York weeks earlier, bound across the Atlantic. The Day Gracia's crew watched the strange vessel yaw aimlessly for 2 hours before daring to board her. Her name, painted on the stern, told them the unthinkable. This was the Mary Celeste. She had sailed 8 days ahead of them. Below decks, the scene was quietly wrong. No signs of violence, no blood, no chaos, but the single lifeboat was gone, and one of the pumps lay disassembled on deck. There was over a meter of water sloshing in the hold, worrying, but nowhere near sinking. The captain's bed held the imprint of a child. The last log entry, 9 days old, reported nothing wrong at all. The missing were 10. Captain Benjamin Briggs, a devout, experienced, famously sober New England master, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 seasoned crewmen. Briggs was no reckless amateur. Colleagues called him one of the finest captains afloat. Whatever drove this man to put his wife and baby into a small open boat in the mid-Atlantic must have seemed, in that moment, safer than staying aboard. The log placed her last known position just off the Azores on the 25th of November. She was found nearly 400 nautical miles away, meaning the Mary Celeste had sailed herself uncrewed for over a week. Her cargo, 1,701 barrels of raw industrial alcohol. When they were finally unloaded, 9 barrels were bone dry. At the salvage hearing in Gibraltar, the Crown's investigator smelled crime. He spun theories of drunken mutiny, of murder, of collusion between the two captains for salvage money. He found a cut on the bow rail he called a sword mark, and stains he called blood. The tests came back, not blood. The sword mark was weathered wood. After 3 months of insinuation, the court found no evidence of foul play, and the mystery went global. Then a 24-year-old ship's doctor made everything worse. In 1884, Arthur Conan Doyle, 3 years before Sherlock Holmes, published a lurid short story about the ship, adding warm meals on the table, a vengeful killer, and a renamed Mary Celeste. Readers took it as fact. Much of what people know about the ship, the still warm tea, the half-eaten breakfast, was never in any inquiry record. It's fiction that swallowed the truth. The theory most historians now favor starts with those 9 empty barrels. Raw alcohol seeping in a sealed hold builds explosive fumes. A rumble, a hiss from the hatches, perhaps a small flash that left no burn, and a captain with his family aboard faces an imminent explosion. Order everyone into the lifeboat, tether it to the ship, wait for the danger to pass. Then the towline parts. The ship sails on. The boat, overloaded in the open Atlantic, does not. The Mary Celeste herself refused to die quietly. She changed hands 17 times in 12 years. Sailors called her cursed, until 1885, when her last owner deliberately ran her onto a Haitian reef and torched her for the insurance money. The fraud was so clumsy, it was detected immediately. The most mysterious ship of the century ended as a botched scam on a pile of rocks. No wreckage of the lifeboat was ever confirmed. No bodies were ever found. 10 people stepped off a perfectly sound ship into legend, and a century and a half of theories, waterspouts, pirates, mutiny, fumes, all crash against the same rock. The total, absolute silence of the evidence. The sea solved this case in 1872 and has never shared the file. What's your verdict? The fumes or something else? Subscribe for more history the ocean swallowed. On Boxing Day 1900, a relief ship dropped anchor off a speck of rock 17 miles west of the Outer Hebrides and blew its whistle. No flag rose over the lighthouse. No keeper came down to the landing. The captain sent up a man named Joseph Moore, who climbed the path alone, pushed open an unlocked door, and found the breakfast things put away. The clock stopped, the lamps trimmed and ready, and no trace, anywhere on the island, of the 3 men paid to be there. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, Donald MacArthur, employed to keep a light at the edge of the world and swallowed by it. This is the vault's file on the Flannan Isles. The Flannans are 7 scraps of grass-topped rock in the open Atlantic, so remote that Hebridean shepherds who grazed sheep there would not stay a night. The islands, they said, belonged to something older. The largest, Eilean Moor, is barely 500 meters long, ringed by cliffs that drop sheer into deep water. In 1899, the Northern Lighthouse Board finished 4 years of brutal construction there. A 70-foot tower whose light stood nearly 300 feet above the sea, with 2 landing stages, east and west, cut into the cliffs, and a small railway to haul supplies up the slope. It had been operational for exactly 1 year and 11 days when its keepers vanished. 3 men kept the light while a 4th rotated ashore. James Ducat, the principal, was a 22-year veteran with a wife and 4 children. Thomas Marshall was the young second assistant. Donald MacArthur, the occasional keeper, filling a vacancy, was a hard character described as fiercely proud, covering for a man on sick leave. Keeping a light was industrial shift work, trimming wicks, winding clockwork, logging weather, polishing the great lens through the night watches. It was lonely, regulated, and safe, provided you respected the one rule written in every keeper's standing orders. In storm, the station is never to be left unmanned. The light failed first. On the 15th of December, a passing steamer bound for Leith noted that the Flannan light, which should have been visible for 24 miles, was dark, and reported it on arrival. Nobody could act. The relief vessel was stormbound at Stromness for days, and the Flannans have no harbor, only those 2 exposed landings where a boat must hover against the swell. So for 11 days, through some of the worst weather of the winter, The tower stood dark, and nobody on the mainland knew why. When the tender finally worked around to the east landing on the 26th, the ropes and cranes stood exactly as the last relief had left them. What Joseph Moore found inside has been embroidered for a century, so the vault keeps to his own account. The entrance gate and outer door were closed. The kitchen was tidy, the pots and pans cleaned, the fire long dead. The clock had run down and stopped. The beds were empty and made. In the hallway, one set of oilskins still hung on its peg, meaning one of the three had gone outside into a Hebridean December in his shirt sleeves. There was no half-eaten meal, no overturned chair. Those details belonged to a poem written 12 years later. The truth was quieter and stranger, a station in perfect order minus its men. The physical evidence was all at the West Landing. Superintendent Robert Muirhead, who investigated for the Lighthouse Board, recorded damage that is hard to picture calmly. A crane platform stripped, a lifebuoy torn from its ropes, an iron railway turned on its side, and a block of stone weighing more than a ton displaced at heights up to 110 feet above the sea. The West Landing sits in a narrow gully that funnels swells into geysers of white water. Something had raked the cliff face far above what anyone thought waves could reach, and Duckett's final log entries, made on the morning of the 15th, recorded the storm still blowing. Then there are the log entries you may have read: Marshall crying, Duckett very quiet, MacArthur praying, and the final line, storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. The vault must be honest. No such entries appear in Muirhead's report or any board record. They surface decades later in mystery magazines, unsourced, and historians regard them as invention. What the real record shows is mundane and therefore more chilling. Routine weather observations, in a steady hand, right up to the morning the station fell silent. Whatever happened on Eilean Moor happened to men who, an hour before, were filling in a form. The board's conclusion and the modern one converge on the sea. The likeliest reconstruction: after days of storm, Duckett and Marshall went down to the West Landing to secure the gear, properly dressed for it, while MacArthur, on duty indoors, saw something from the tower, a set of giant waves running in. He ran to warn them, coatless, and the sea took all three. Oceanographers have since measured how that gully concentrates wave energy. Occasional waves on that coast run far beyond the average swell. It requires no ghosts, only bad timing, 3 brave men, and 30 seconds of the Atlantic doing what it statistically, occasionally, does. The poem arrived in 1912, Wilfred Wilson Gibson's Flannan Isles, and it is the reason you have heard of this story: the untouched meal, the overturned chair, the hint of madness and seabirds that were not quite birds. It is magnificent and almost entirely fiction, and it buried the plane report under a legend. The light itself never again missed a night. Keepers returned within days and served, 3 at a time, for another 71 years, until 1971, when the Flannan light became one of the first great automations. Today, a machine flashes twice every 30 seconds over the empty island, a lighthouse with no one left to vanish. The vault keeps the Flannan file next to its other empty vessels, the Mary Celeste, the silent ships, because it teaches the same lesson: an absence preserves better than a wreck. 3 graves exist for Duckett, Marshall, and MacArthur, and all 3 are the sea which files no reports. What remains is the station in perfect order, lamps trimmed, gate shut, 1 oilskin on its peg, the last hour of 3 working men, readable like a tide mark on a cliff. The light still turns. The gully still funnels the swell, and once every winter or so, a wave still climbs 100 feet of rock just to show it can. Subscribe. The vault keeps the lights that outlived their keepers. In March 1918, a United States Navy ship longer than 1.5 football fields, carrying 309 men and 11,000 tons of ore, sailed north from Barbados into fair Caribbean weather and was never seen, heard, or found again. No distress call, no wreckage, no bodies, no oil slick, then or ever. The USS Cyclops remains, more than a century later, the single largest loss of life in the history of the US Navy outside combat, and the Navy's official conclusion, published and never revised, may be the most honest sentence in the vault, the most baffling mystery in the annals of the Navy. Cyclops was a collier, a giant floating coal scuttle, one of 4 sisters built to feed the fleet's furnaces: Cyclops, Proteus, Nereus, Jupiter. 19,000 tons loaded, a forest of coaling derricks down her spine, and a silhouette so distinctive sailors called her class the Covered Wagons. Through the Great War's first American year, she shuttled fuel across the Atlantic without incident. In early 1918, she was sent south with a new cargo: manganese ore from Brazil, dense mineral ballast for the steel mills, a load twice as heavy per shovelful as the coal her holds were designed for, sitting low and hard against her keel. The last voyage assembled its omens with the neatness of fiction. Loading in Rio, she took on ore to the limit and passed it, some later argued. One of her 2 engines was crippled, a cracked cylinder putting her on half power for the journey home. In Rio, she also embarked passengers with stories of their own. The American Consul General Alfred Gottschalk, rumored in the febrile atmosphere of 1918 to hold German sympathies, and 70-odd naval prisoners and rating transfers, including men connected to a shipboard murder awaiting justice ashore. A heavy, half-flame ship, stuffed with ore, grievances, and rumors, pointed north. Her captain completed the cast. George W. Worley, born Johann Friedrich Wichmann in Hanover, Germany, a fact the Navy would chew over at length, was a naval auxiliary veteran of the old school and, by the sworn accounts of his officers, a tyrant of the memorable kind. He did rounds of the deck at night in long underwear, a bowler hat, and a cane, and once chased a junior officer with a pistol. His men had formally complained. An inquiry had backed the captain. Whether Worley was a traitor, a drunk, an eccentric, or merely a Gilbert and Sullivan character in the wrong genre, the Atlantic never gave anyone the chance to decide. Then came the detour no one ordered. Bound non-stop for Baltimore, Cyclops instead turned up unannounced at Bridgetown, Barbados, on March 3rd, where Worley requested extra coal and provisions he arguably did not need. The American consul there thought the visit odd enough to cable Washington about it afterwards. On March 4th, 1918, she steamed out of Bridgetown into good weather, was possibly sighted once more by a liner the following evening, and then the record simply stops. 9 days later, she failed to appear in Baltimore. The Navy waited, then searched, then kept searching along every mile of her possible tracks. The sea had been swept clean. Wartime supplied the first theories. A German U-boat, post-war examination of the Kaiser's records, found no submarine and no raider anywhere near her track in those weeks, and no German claim, which Berlin would gladly have made. Mutiny, with the prisoners and the pistol-waving captain. Capture or defection, with the German-born Worley and the rumor-shadowed consul steaming for the fatherland. The Navy took that one seriously enough to keep files open for years. German archives, opened after the armistice, held nothing at all. Every human explanation required survivors, wreckage, or paperwork. There were none of any. The explanation the engineers favor is quieter and far more frightening. Manganese ore is dense, wet, and treacherous. Loaded carelessly, it can shift like liquid. Its weight concentrates stress along a hull built for lighter, bulkier coal. Cyclops's class had a known structural softness. Her sister Proteus later shed hull plates carrying heavy ore. At a possible storm cell off the Virginia Capes on March 10th, a half-powered ship unable to keep her head to the seas, and naval architects can sketch the ending in under a minute. A hull girder failing midships, a ship breaking her back and going down whole in 60 seconds or less, too fast for a single spark of wireless, holds of dense ore dragging every floatable scrap down with her. And then the story does the thing that keeps it in this vault. It happens again. In late 1941, Cyclops's 2 surviving ore-carrying sisters, Proteus and Nereus, sailed the same waters on the same run, weeks apart, loaded with heavy ore for the war effort. Both vanished. No distress calls, no confirmed wreckage, 300 more men between them. U-boat records, checked again after that war, again claimed neither with confidence. 3 sisters, 1 route, 1 cargo, 1 identical silence, 23 years apart. Either the design carried its flaw to the grave 3 times, the sober reading, or the patch of ocean between Barbados and the Chesapeake keeps a very specific appetite. It was the Cyclops file, decades later, that the triangle makers reached for first. When the 1960s pulp writers drew their 3 lines on the Atlantic, Florida, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, Flight 19 gave them their modern miracle, but Cyclops gave them their ancient one. The biggest ship, the most men, the cleanest vanishing, conveniently inside the lines. The sisters made it a trilogy. But the engineering explanation was already sitting in Navy correspondence: structural failure, shifting or sudden foundering mattered little against 309 men and 0 clues. Legends are built precisely in the gap where evidence should be. Somewhere off the American coast, probably in the deep water beyond the continental shelf, a covered wagon 165 meters long lies, broken with her oar still in her holds, the largest American warship grave never visited, because in more than a century, no search has ever found her. 309 names, from Captain Worley to the prisoners in her brig, have no marker but a line in the Navy's registry and a sentence admitting bafflement. Flight 19 got the legend, but Cyclops got there first, and she is still exactly where the sea put her, keeping the original secret of the triangle. Subscribe, the vault keeps the ships that never sent goodbye. On the 2nd of July, 1937, the most famous woman in the world flew toward a speck of coral in the central Pacific and into a static-filled silence that has now lasted 89 years. Amelia Earhart had 22,000 miles of her round-the-world flight behind her and 2,500 to go. Ahead lay Howland Island, 3 kilometers of sand and bird colonies, barely higher than the swells around it. Her last confirmed words came through a Coast Guard radio at 8:43 that morning, tense and quick. Then the Pacific closed over the story, and the search for Amelia Earhart became the longest game of hide-and-seek in history. It is hard from this distance to grasp how famous she was. First woman across the Atlantic by air in 1928, as a passenger, which embarrassed her. First woman to fly it alone in 1932, wrestling a leaking, ice-crusted Vega through a storm to an Irish sheep pasture. Speed records, altitude records, the first solo flight from Hawaii to California by anyone. Ticker tape parades, White House dinners, her own luggage line and flying clothes label, and behind the celebrity, a stubborn campaign to prove that competence had no gender. By 1937, one prize remained, the equator itself, around the world the long way. Her machine was a Lockheed Electra 10E twin engines, polished aluminium, stripped of seats and stuffed with fuel tanks until it was less an airliner than a flying bomb with a post office address. Her navigator was Fred Noonan, the man who had charted Pan American's Pacific routes, a celestial navigation artist with a sextant, and the gossip said, a thirst he was fighting. The route ran east, South America, Africa, India, Southeast Asia, Australia, 22,000 miles of it in 40 days, all pointing at the crossing that mattered, New Guinea to tiny Howland Island, the longest overwater leg ever attempted to so small a target. Everything about the Howland leg was a stack of small compromises. The Electra lifted off from Lie's dirt strip at maximum overload. Ahead lay 4,000 kilometers, 19 hours, and a dawn landfall on an island the height of a beach dune. Waiting at Howland was the Coast Guard cutter Itasca, boilers smoking to make a marker, radios manned. What followed was a tragedy of frequencies. Earhart could not hear Itasca's voice transmissions. Itasca could not get a bearing on hers. The one frequency Noonan could have used for direction finding, the aircraft could not receive on. Her signals grew louder through the morning, strength 5, close enough that men on deck scanned the horizon, while both sides broadcast into each other's deafness. At 7:42 a.m. her voice came through strained, "We must be on you, but cannot see you, gas is running low." At 8:43, the last confirmed message, "We are on the line 157-337, running north and south." A navigator's line through Howland, drawn from the Sunrise, Noonan's textbook fallback. Then nothing. The Navy launched the greatest search in its history to that date. An aircraft carrier, a battleship, dozens of planes sweeping 250,000 square miles. 16 days and not a bolt, not an oil slick. On July the 19th, the fleet sailed away. The official verdict, fuel exhaustion, crash at sea. The public never fully signed it. Because the line 157-337 followed south past Howland, runs almost exactly to another island, Gardner, today Nicumaroro, uninhabited, ringed by a murderous reef, and Nicumaroro will not stay quiet. In the week after the disappearance, radio operators across the Pacific logged dozens of possible distress calls, some judged credible then and now signals that could only be sent if the aircraft was on land, turning its engine to charge batteries. In 1940, a British colonial officer found a partial human skeleton under a tree with a sextant box, a woman's shoe, and a Benedictine bottle. A doctor measured the bones as a stocky male's. They were then lost. Modern reanalysis of his numbers concluded they fit one body in 100 and fit Amelia Earhart almost exactly. The island kept producing exhibits for a century, a scrap of aircraft aluminium whose rivet pattern fights experts to a draw, a 1937 British survey photo showing an odd shape on the reef edge, freckled cream jars, a woman's compact, improvised tools at a castaway campsite, giant coconut crabs that could explain a scattered skeleton. And yet decades of expeditions, sonar sweeps, and in 2019 Robert Ballard himself, the man who found Titanic, have failed to raise one incontestable piece of the Electra. Every Nicumaroro clue is suggestive, none is conclusive. It is the most documented maybe in the history of exploration. The rival theory is crueler and simpler. She ran the line north, found nothing, and ditched, in which case the Electra lies intactish in 5 kilometers of abyssal stillness near Howland, one of the best preserved wrecks on Earth, waiting in the dark. Deep search teams have burned fortunes on it, grid after sonar grid, and in 2024, a torpedo-shaped anomaly that set headlines alight, until the return visit resolved it into a natural rock formation. The Japanese capture theory, for completeness, survives on a misread photograph and wartime fog. Historians give it little. The ocean has 2 hiding places, and it is defending both. Why can't we let her go? Partly because the mystery is genuinely open, a rare thing this century, but mostly because of what she was, the pilot who wrote, before her last flight, that women must try to do things as men have tried, and that failure must be a challenge to others. She vanished at the exact altitude of her legend, mid-attempt, forever 40. Her disappearance did what her landings never could, made her permanent. Somewhere on a reef shelf or an abyssal plain sits a folded aluminium answer. Finding it would close the file and diminish nothing. The search has never actually stopped. New expeditions are being planned, as this is recorded, aimed at both hiding places. Perhaps the crabs and the tides have erased Nicumaroro's last proof. Perhaps a sonar pass next year lights up a twin-tailed shadow off Howland. Either way, the ending was written by Earhart herself, in a letter left for her husband in case the Pacific one, "Please know I am quite aware of the hazards. I want to do it because I want to do it." The vault holds many people the world lost. It holds very few who told the world, in writing, that the risk was the point. Subscribe, the vault keeps the flights still being flown. On the afternoon of December 5, 1945, 5 United States Navy torpedo bombers lifted off from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine training flight. The war was over. The weather was fair. The route was a simple triangle they had flown before. 14 airmen, 5 aircraft, and by nightfall, every one of them had vanished from the face of the earth. Then the planes sent to rescue them vanished too. 6 aircraft, 27 men. Not one body, not one life raft, not one splinter of wreckage ever found. This is Flight 19. Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale was a training mill, converting green pilots onto the Grumman Avenger, a torpedo bomber built like a bank vault, 30,000 pounds of aircraft that crews called the Iron Bird. That afternoon's exercise was navigation problem number 1. Fly east over the Atlantic, drop practice bombs on a shoal called Hens and Chickens, continue east, turn north over Grand Bahama, then angle home southwest. A closed triangle, 2 hours, all over familiar water. The 5 crews of Flight 19 had flown legs like it dozens of times. Leading them was Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a combat veteran of Guadalcanal and the Pacific with 2,500 flying hours, more than every student behind him combined. But Taylor was new to Fort Lauderdale. He had spent the war flying out of Miami and the Florida Keys, and the geography stamped into his instincts was Keys geography. It would matter. The bombing run went perfectly. The flight turned north on the second leg. And somewhere over the Bahamas, inside the leader's cockpit, something quietly broke. At about 3:45, another instructor flying near the coast overheard a strange radio exchange. A student asking Taylor for his compass reading. Then Taylor's voice, "I don't know where we are. We must have got lost after that last turn." Both of his compasses had failed, and looking down at the scattered islands of the Bahamas, Taylor's key-strained memory betrayed him. He became convinced the flight was over the Florida Keys, hundreds of miles southwest of their true position. Every correction he made from that belief would be exactly wrong. Believing the Keys lay beneath him, Taylor reasoned Florida must be northeast, so he turned his 5 aircraft northeast and flew them further into the open Atlantic. The radio traffic grew ragged. One student can be heard on the intercepts, with the clarity of a man watching his own doom assemble. "If we would just fly west, we would get home." Discipline held, nobody broke formation. The weather curdled squalls, a falling sun, seas building to 30 feet. Shore stations begged Taylor to switch to the emergency channel. He refused, afraid his scattered students would lose each other in the change. By early evening, shore operators triangulated the flight's true position, far north of the Bahamas, 200 miles out beyond reach. Taylor's last clear transmissions are procedure and courage in equal measure. All planes close up tight. When the first man drops below 10 gallons of fuel, we all go down together. Around 8 o'clock, the tanks ran dry. Somewhere in the dark, in 30-foot seas, 5 iron birds hit the Atlantic. An Avenger ditched on calm water floats for perhaps a minute. That night, the water was not calm. Rescue began at once and became the second tragedy. 2 Martin Mariner flying boats roared off from the Banana River station into the night. Training 49, with 13 men aboard, made one radio check 3 minutes after takeoff and was never heard from again. At 12 minutes past 9, the crew of the tanker SS Gaines Mills watched a fireball bloom on the horizon and burn on the sea. Mariners leaked fuel vapor so notoriously that crews called them flying gas tanks. One spark, airborne, the ocean now held 27 men. What followed was one of the largest air and sea searches ever mounted. 5 days, hundreds of ships and aircraft, 250,000 square miles of ocean and Everglades swamp combed from the Bahamas to the Gulf. They found the Gaines Mills oil slick, and of Flight 19 itself nothing. No raft, no die marker, no drifting me west. 5 30,000-pound aircraft, and the sea had swallowed every gram. Navy investigators filled 500 pages. Their conclusion crushed the pilots' families. Cause, the flight leaders' confusion. Taylor's mother refused to accept it. No wreck, no proof, she argued, and the Navy blinked. The verdict was amended to cause unknown, and the sea kept teasing. In 1991, a salvage ship hunting Spanish gold found 5 Avengers lying together on the seabed off Fort Lauderdale. The headlines wrote themselves. Then the serial numbers came up. 5 different aircraft, 5 separate training accidents, ditched over the years in the same stretch of practice sky. The ocean floor off Florida is littered with iron birds. None of them, so far, are the 5. It took the legend 20 years to hatch. A 1950 Wire story noted planes that flew off into nowhere. By 1964, a pulp magazine had drawn 3 lines on a map, Florida, Bermuda, Puerto Rico, and named the space between them the deadly Bermuda Triangle, with Flight 19 as Exhibit 1. The books that followed sold 20 million copies. The dull truth, a good pilot, a broken compass, a wrong hunch, a merciless sea never stood a chance against a shape you could draw on a map. Subscribe, the vault keeps the flights that never came home. On the 2nd of August, 1947, a British airliner named Stardust climbed out of Buenos Aires, bound across the Andes for Santiago. Aboard were 5 crew and 6 passengers, among them a king's messenger with diplomatic papers chained to his wrist. At 5:41 that afternoon, the radio operator tapped out a routine arrival message to Santiago, ending with one word repeated, clear and deliberate, 3 times, STENDEC. 4 minutes later, the aircraft ceased to exist. No wreck, no bodies, no explanation for 53 years. And when the mountain finally gave the aeroplane back, the word remained. This is the vault's favorite kind of file, the one that half closes. Stardust was a warbird in civilian clothes, an Avro-Lancastrian, a converted Lancaster bomber stripped of guns and fitted with 11 seats and windows. Its operator, British South American Airways, was run almost entirely by decorated bomber veterans, men who had survived the Ruhr and treated the world's worst air routes as a peacetime encore. The airline's chief, an air vice marshal, flew routes himself and named every aircraft Star something: Star Light, Star Trail, Stardust. BSAA's safety record was, even by 1947 standards, alarming. Its men called the Andes crossing flying the hump of the Atlantic Run. They flew it anyway in unpressurized aircraft on dead reckoning. The Andes crossing was a knife-edge calculation. The peaks along the direct track to Santiago rise past 6,000 meters. The Lancastrian ceiling was barely above them. Pilots threaded passes or climbed into the thin, freezing air above the ridgeline, into weather no forecaster could see, because west of the mountains lay the Pacific and almost no reporting stations. That afternoon, a storm sat on the range, and Stardust's crew chose to go high, over the top, through cloud. Captain Reginald Cook radioed his position steadily as the aircraft bored west through the murk at 24,000 feet. Every position he sent was wrong. Nobody in 1947 understood the jet stream, the river of wind, 300 kilometers an hour and more, that snakes above the ridges at exactly the altitude Stardust was flying. Invisible, unforecast, and that day blowing hard against the aircraft's nose. Cook's dead reckoning said the mountains were behind him and Santiago lay ahead. The jet stream had quietly stolen perhaps 100 kilometers of his progress. When the crew began their descent through cloud toward what their sums said was the Chilean coastal plain, they were in fact descending directly into the east face of Mount Chupungato, one of the highest peaks in the Americas. At 5:41 p.m., Santiago's operator took Stardust's final transmission, ETA Santiago 17.45 HRS, then in firm, unhesitating Morse, STENDC. The Chilean operator, puzzled, asked for a repeat, STENDC, and again STENDC, then silence of the permanent kind. It is not a code group, not an abbreviation in any manual, not a place, not a name. The operator who sent it, Dennis Harmer, was a wartime veteran with a clean, disciplined hand, not a man who invented words at 9,000 meters. Whatever STENDC meant, he meant it. The search was immediate and enormous. Chilean and Argentine patrols, BSAA's own crews quartering the range for days, and it found nothing at all. Not a scorch mark, not a scrap of aluminium. An airliner, 11 people, and a diplomatic bag had vanished between 2 radio calls. The mystery curdled quickly: sabotage for the diplomat's papers, gold aboard. By the 1950s, as flying saucer fever swept the world, STENDC found its immortality. Anagram hunters noted it rearranges to descent, and a UFO magazine took the word for its title. The Andes kept their counsel for half a century. Then, in 1998, 2 Argentine climbers high on Chupungato walked into a field of wreckage emerging from a glacier, an engine, twisted propeller blades, and a Rolls-Royce data plate. The Army expedition that followed in 2000 confirmed it. Stardust, at 4,800 meters, 50 kilometers east of where anyone had looked. The aircraft had flown straight into the glacier's snowfield at cruise speed. The impact and avalanche entombed it instantly, which is why searchers in 1947 saw nothing. The glacier then swallowed the wreck whole and spent 5 decades digesting it downhill, a conveyor belt delivering its cargo 1 careful meter a year. The ice had kept everything, wheels still inflated. A propeller whose bent tips proved the engines were under power at impact. The crew never saw it coming. And the passengers came home too, preserved remains from which Argentine forensic teams identified over the following years most of those aboard, including a hand still wearing its rings. The king's messengers' diplomatic papers were never recovered. The glacier is assumed to hold them still, along with roughly a third of the airframe, which the ice releases in installments. Climbers find fresh pieces most summers. Stardust is still landing 79 years late. The mountain answered every question but one. The crash is solved. A textbook-controlled flight into terrain caused by a wind nobody knew existed. Stardust's crew were among the jet stream's first victims, punished for flying too high too early, with sums that were honest and wrong. But STENDEC survived the wreck's discovery untouched. The best guesses remain guesses. A hypoxia-scrambled Stardust end, a garbled descent code, a private sign-off among old bombermen. The letters sit in the record, exactly as received, 3 times, refusing every theory. Some files close, some only half close. There is something fitting in an aircraft called Stardust dissolving into a glacier and returning as fragments, like light from a dead star arriving long after the source has gone. 11 people got their names back because ice is a better archivist than fire, and one word got away clean. Somewhere in the last 4 minutes over Chupangato, a disciplined man tapped 7 letters into the dark with total confidence, and no human being since has known what he meant. The vault holds many locked rooms. This is the smallest, 7 letters wide. Subscribe, the vault keeps the words that outlive their senders. On the morning of the 1st of December 1948, a man was found dead on a beach in Adelaide, Australia. He was leaning against the seawall, immaculately dressed, a half-smoked cigarette on his collar. He had no wallet, no identification, and every label had been cut from his clothes. In his hidden fob pocket was a scrap of paper bearing 2 printed words in Persian, Tamam shud, it is ended. For 74 years, nobody could say who he was. This is the case of the Somerton Man. The basics should have been easy. A well-built man in his 40s, clean-shaven, wearing a smart jacket and polished shoes, the kind of man someone reports missing. But nobody did. Detectives circulated his photograph across Australia and the world. They matched him to missing persons reports again and again. Every single one was eliminated. It was as though he had stepped onto that beach from nowhere, a man with no past and apparently no name. The autopsy only deepened the mystery. His organs were congested, his spleen abnormally enlarged, and the pathologist was convinced he had been poisoned, most likely by a fast-acting toxin that leaves no trace, the kind that breaks down in the body within hours. But there was no vomit, no convulsion, no sign of struggle. He appeared to have simply lain down against the wall and died peacefully, as if he had chosen the spot. The coroner could not even state the cause of death with certainty. Then came a break. A suitcase, checked into the cloakroom at Adelaide railway station the day before the body was found, was traced to the man. Inside was a strange wardrobe, clothes with the name tags removed, a stenciling brush, a table knife cut down into a tool. Only 3 items carried any name at all, the laundry markings T. Keane. Police chased every Keane on earth. None of them was missing. Even the one thread of a name led nowhere. The scrap in his pocket was the real riddle. Tamam shud are the final words of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a Persian book of poems about living fully because death comes for us all. Police appealed for the specific copy the words had been torn from. Astonishingly, a man came forward. He had found a rare edition of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back seat of his unlocked car near the beach around the time of the death. The torn page matched. The book had been found. And inside the back cover, faintly penciled, were 2 things that have haunted investigators ever since. The first was a phone number. The second was a sequence of capital letters, 5 lines of seemingly random characters that read like a code, WRGOABABD and on. Cryptographers, military and amateur, have attacked it for decades. Australian naval intelligence gave up. No one has ever agreed on what, if anything, it means. It may be a cipher. It may be the doodling of a dying mind. The phone number belonged to a young nurse who lived a few hundred meters from where the body was found. When police showed her the plaster cast they had made of the dead man's face, a detective said she looked as though she might faint. She seemed to recognize him, yet she denied ever knowing him and refused to say more. She took whatever she knew to her grave. For years, she was the tantalizing human center of the mystery, the woman who reacted and would not explain. The theories bloomed into legend. It was the dawn of the Cold War, and just north of Adelaide lay Woomera, one of the West's most secret weapons testing ranges. A poisoned, nameless man with a coded message and a mysterious woman. Surely he was a spy. Others argued for a jilted lover, a suicide dressed as a riddle, a smuggler silenced. Each theory explained some of the facts and stumbled on the rest. The truth stayed sealed under a headstone that read, simply, "The Unknown Man." In 2021, the body was finally exhumed, and modern DNA did what a lifetime of detective work could not. In 2022, a researcher using genetic genealogy announced a name: Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer and instrument maker from Melbourne, born 1905. He had drifted from his family, separated from his wife, an ordinary, troubled man, not a spy. Investigators believe the case is, at last, solved. And yet, because a name is not an answer, we still do not know how Carl Webb died, or why every label was cut from his clothes, or what the letters mean, or what the nurse saw in that plaster face. The identification closed the file and reopened the mystery in the same breath. A real man, finally named, whose last act on Earth remains as unreadable as the code in his book. It is ended, the paper said. It isn't quite. Subscribe, the vault keeps the cases that answers only deepen. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, a man in a business suit boarded a flight from Portland to Seattle, ordered a bourbon and soda, and handed the stewardess a note. It said he had a bomb. Over the next few hours, he would extort $200,000 and 4 parachutes, release the passengers, and then, somewhere over the freezing forests of the Pacific Northwest, lower the rear stairs of the jet and leap into the night. He has never been found. This is the only unsolved skyjacking in American history. He bought his ticket under the name Dan Cooper. A press mix-up would later turn it into D.B. Cooper, and that is the name that stuck to a man who never really existed. Witnesses remembered him as calm, polite, middle-aged, in a dark suit and tie. He seemed to know aircraft. He seemed to know parachutes. And he was so unremarkable that, for a while, nobody on the plane realized anything was wrong at all. He showed the stewardess the note, then opened his briefcase a crack, a glimpse of red cylinders and wires. His demands were precise: $200,000 in 20s, 4 parachutes, and a fuel truck standing by in Seattle. On the ground, the FBI scrambled to assemble the ransom, photographing the serial number of every single bill. The plane circled Seattle for 2 hours while it was arranged. Cooper, meanwhile, waited and sipped his drink and paid his bar tab. At Seattle, he kept his word. The money and parachutes were brought aboard. The 36 passengers walked free, never knowing how close they had come. Then Cooper issued his flight plan: take off again, head for Mexico, low and slow, landing gear down, cabin unpressurized, rear stairway unlatched. Only the pilots and 1 flight attendant remained. He sent her to the cockpit and told her to stay there. Alone in the back of the jet, D.B. Cooper opened the airsteer into the storm. Somewhere north of Portland, at around 8 in the evening, the crew felt a change in air pressure, the telltale bump of the stairs shifting under a weight. When they landed, the rear stairway was down and the cabin was empty. Cooper was gone, into rain, darkness, and near-freezing air, over some of the most rugged forest in the country. He had jumped with a bag of cash strapped to his body, and as far as anyone can prove, simply ceased to exist. The manhunt was enormous. The FBI opened a case they would work for 45 years, chasing more than 1,000 suspects. Soldiers and volunteers combed the drop zone. Not a trace turned up, no parachute, no body, no bag, not one of the marked $20 bills entering circulation anywhere in the world. It was as if the forest had swallowed him whole. The absence of evidence became its own kind of evidence, and the legend began to grow. Then in 1980, a break. An 8-year-old boy digging on a sandy bank of the Columbia River uncovered a rotting bundle of cash, nearly $6,000 in 20s, the serial numbers matching Cooper's ransom exactly. It was the only physical trace of the case ever recovered, but it raised more questions than it answered. How did the money get to that riverbank, miles from the drop zone? Had Cooper died on landing? Had he survived and buried it? Nobody could say. Theories multiplied for decades. Skydivers insisted no one could survive that jump, night, storm, wrong parachute, business shoes. Others were certain a trained paratrooper could have walked away. The FBI ran down copycats, deathbed confessions, and relatives convinced their uncle was the man. DNA from Cooper's abandoned clip-on tie failed to close the case. In 2016, after 45 years and no answer, the FBI officially suspended its investigation. Officially, D.B. Cooper is still out there. His one lasting victim was the airline industry. Cooper had exploited the rear air stair of the 727, so Boeing fitted everyone with a device, still nicknamed the Cooper vane, that locks the stairs shut in flight. He is, in a strange way, the reason a whole era of easy air travel ended, the patient zero of aviation security. A polite man in a business suit rewrote the rules of flying and never claimed the credit. So what happened to D.B. Cooper? He is either a pile of bones under the pines with $194,000 scattered nearby, or an old man who took the greatest secret of his life quietly to the grave. The forest has kept its answer for over 50 years. All that is certain is that on one stormy November night, a man stepped out of an airplane and into pure legend, and the door closed behind him. Subscribe, the vault keeps the ones who got away.